Hey folks, it's Sadesh, and I am back today to talk with someone who is, a bit of an expert on things happening with resiliency. And this is CloudStream, if I forgot to say it. Your weekly Friday cast from the Cross Cloud Solutions team here at VMware. And Blue is joining us, and we've had some fun discussions about customer stories, about personal examples. But Blue, will you tell us a little bit about your sort of background, how you got to where you are at VMware, and what you're responsible for now, and how it definitely helps customers, I think.
Yeah, so first of all, hi Sudesh, hi everyone listening. Thank you so much for having me here. My name is Belu de Arbeláez. I am the product line marketing manager in charge for VMware's data protection as a service portfolio. And I am mainly focused on VMware's newest DRaaS offering called VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery, which is what we're going to cover today. I am originally from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I spent most of my life there. I came to the US 6 years ago to pursue my MBA at Berkeley Haas School of Business. During my time at Berkeley, I interned at Veritas Technologies, where I started working with two of their data protection solutions, one more focused on the SMB segment and one for enterprise. And I ended up driving cloud product marketing for their data protection flagship solution for 3 years. And then the opportunity came along to join VMware and drive product marketing for their data protection as a service portfolio. And I just couldn't say no. So it's been a year and here I am.
Nice. And, when you talk about portfolios, I think often it's easy for people to get lost in, especially the VMware portfolio, right? It's a large suite of products, and I think one just area for us to clarify, are we talking about like disaster recovery across the entire suite of products, or where is the focus area for your suite of products?
The focus area is in 3 key products. So Site Recovery Manager, which covers on-premises to on-premises disaster recovery. VMware Site Recovery, which also covers cloud to cloud, and VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery, which is the newest DRaaS offering, which offers on-demand disaster recovery with a more customizable SLA configuration.
Nice. Now, one of the things that is hard about disaster recovery, and I think this is even on a personal level difficult for us to figure out as people, is how much do you need it versus when you need to recover from an outage or an emergency, is it actually there and does it work, right? And I think this is one of the more complicated questions for large and medium enterprise customers who are trying to figure out, well, I do have something, and the question tends to be, is it good enough for us to be able to continue our business? But I'm curious, when you think about the definition of disaster recovery for the portfolio that you cover, is that an adequate explanation? Is that where you would adjust that?
Yes, I think it's an adequate explanation. I think there are a lot of caveats and a lot of tricky aspects to disaster recovery. So if you think about it, as individuals, we already have trouble managing our own data, right? So understanding what data we hold, how we protect it, where we store it. And at a much bigger scale, it is the same for enterprises, right? So disaster recovery not only requires understanding what your data estate is and how you're managing it, but it also implies that you need to understand what the best way is to protect that data from the unexpected. And, in today's world, the unexpected might be a power outage, a ransomware attack, a natural disaster, or any sort of cyber attack. So disaster recovery requires being ready for it. And there's some more that needs to happen in order for companies to be able to properly execute their DR operations, right? And so it's being ready, it's understanding what tools you need to use to properly recover in the face of the unexpected. And it's being able to use those tools easily and seamlessly with all the rest of your entire infrastructure. So that is the value proposition that VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery brings to the table.
So one thing that you mentioned that I want to kind of focus a little bit more on is that the classic definition of disaster recovery used to be, I need to recover my enterprise application. But something you pointed out is, I think this is on everyone's minds these days. If you're an IT manager, if you're a director, if you're a CIO, and that's ransomware. It's particularly, I think, dangerous because it used to be, oh, I can just store my my recovery sources in this other area and they'll be fine. But my understanding of sort of the complexity there now is that ransomware attackers tend to also infect those areas where those backup source copies are kept. And I'm curious, what's changed in our offering that helps customers who may be going through the complexity of trying to determine how they want to protect against that?
Well, the answer to that, and yes, it is true that attackers are targeting backup copies more and more. So finding a viable copy to recover from is becoming increasingly difficult for organizations around the world, right? The way we solve that problem is by having support for immutable snapshots, right? What is the benefit of immutable snapshots? These are air-gapped snapshots that cannot be altered by malware. So in the process of ransomware recovery, you are able to easily test each of those snapshots for presence of ransomware and actually identify what the last known good state is. So basically, immutability and air gapping are two very important components of the solution that we offer, and these are specifically suited for the ransomware protection use case.
Nice. And I think what's important about that is, especially for teams who are listening and thinking about where those source copies are kept, it's, well, just because they're there, if they're writable, there's a possibility that somebody could tamper with them, and that causes obviously a recovery issue down the line. Now, there were a couple of things that you've been working on that I think are interesting. The first was, as I understand it, you've been working on some blogs, and these have covered, I think the first one is drastic measures, right? And so, first of all, I like the play on words. That's fun. And when you think about what those measures are, what the sort of analysis is that a customer has to go through, as well as what they need to communicate to the organization. When I was in IT, which was some time ago, we would be able to make I'll call it a unilateral decision about how a system would be backed up and or recovered. And we did so without taking input from other stakeholders, right? Often we were like, oh, we'll just restore this data and sure, you'll be fine, right? Like you're good to go. Later during our tests and working with the business unit, we would usually find out, well, you managed to recover a portion of this data, but unfortunately it's unusable because we don't know where all the transactions that were in process happened to go. And we were like, oh, you just lost those. And they were like, well, then this solution doesn't work for us. And we would be at a standstill because we hadn't really comprehended what the recovery kind of standpoint needed to be for the business unit. And I'm curious, do you cover that or talk about those topics in this blog?
So a little bit. So cyber resiliency is a team sport, right? This is something that companies need to realize. Like, it's not the backup admin that will be responsible for disaster recovery. It's the security admin, the ops admin. It's going to be a group of people who all play a critical role in ensuring that those applications are available and able to be used when needed, right? So to give a little framework for example, to a ransomware recovery incident, there are 5 key stages that we want to identify. And I'll speak a little bit as to how one of our security solutions, Carbon Black, plays a key role also in helping with this process, right? So you have identify, prevent, detect, respond, and recover, right? And you have a a number of different activities that need to happen in each of those stages. But utilizing VMware solutions as a team, right? Like joint solutions allows you to properly say, iterate and identify the good recovery point, which is a critical point in ransomware recovery. So yeah, to your point, it is a team sport, and we are actually trying to get companies to realize that it's not just about having siloed products that individually work for a particular purpose, but it's about thinking about what the long-term objective is, right? And that is transitioning to a multi-cloud, multi-purpose structure.
Yeah, and I think there are 3 or 4 things I want to kind of highlight in that explanation. The first is that as we look across organizations, more and more, the issues are not with the technology platform, but they're with the process and the people in the organizations. And something that you mentioned, I think, is critical, is that disaster recovery and resiliency in general used to be a single silo IT play, meaning if you're in IT operations, you were responsible for the resiliency and recovery plan to recover these applications. Now, not only does security need to be involved, also typically application development also needs to be involved, and it's a unified process that goes towards what recovery looks like. And I think you also highlighted the need for a security platform that is integrated with the recovery platform, which I think is also a key, right? Because if you essentially have some sort of detection of an anomaly and you have no way to correlate that with where the recovery target might be, you're going to be spending a lot of time in logs, and you're going to be spending a lot of wasted effort trying to figure that stuff out. And I think maybe that's another key point that I would take away from that example, is that it depends on how you're resourced, right? A lot of organizations need to make an investment in order to avoid having to spin up an entire team to try to manage that whole process. I'd be curious, do you cover or have you covered sort of what the level of automation is that our solutions bring towards helping teams that might be distributed teams, et cetera, that have to work on resiliency and recovery operations?
Well, particularly for the case of Carbon Black and VMware Cloud DR, we have developed a joint work stream for ransomware protection. We are looking to empower users to use the products jointly at some point. But for now, it's VMware consistent infrastructure working together, right? We don't have a product integration at the moment. That said, the level of automation is definitely important, and that is definitely baked into the VMware Cloud DR capabilities for orchestration, failover and failback, as well as all the reporting that we include for compliance and DR health checks.
Nice. And I'll say one of the classic issues with DR is a lot of organizations set it and forget it, which is a unfortunate methodology, because essentially once you've set it and you don't test it, this is one of the bigger areas of conflict with recovery plans. Just as a personal example, my brother works for a fire suppression company, and his organization was targeted with ransomware, and they had a, if you will, set it and forget it policy. And it was running all greens, right? You check the dashboard, everything looks good. However, when they tried to recover, that's when they determined that their source recovery was invalid and not something that they could use. And I'm curious, is testing automation also part of the process that is baked in?
Absolutely. So one of the key differentiators for VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery is that it empowers people to test their DR plans non-disruptively, right? So if you currently have an on-premises traditional DR solution, you have downtime when you want to test your systems and you want to do like a test failover and failback, right? With VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery, that doesn't happen, and it can be done by a single person. So you don't need a team to be managing the solution to be able to conduct your DR testing and execution when the time comes, right? But yeah, the idea is not to have a set and forget, like you say. It's more about having a consistent exercise of a plan that, considering research, like there will be a ransomware attack every 11 seconds by the end of this year. So the chances of enterprises and companies around the world having to execute that plan, I wouldn't say are certain, but are pretty likely.
Nice. And when you think when you think about customers who are probably ideal profiles for sort of the VCDR on demand solution, who are those customers? Do you have any that you would kind of name as being success stories, or anything that you would throw out where if they're listening today, you're like, hey, this is a great way for a customer to achieve value for their particular situation?
Yeah, so we recently completed a case study with one of our customers, American company. They're a geospatial engineering company that is using VMware Cloud DR to protect their mission critical workloads. So they initially started off with a colo lease that was expiring. They were looking to modernize their disaster recovery, lower their operational costs because they had a lot of idle hardware that they were paying for. And they were extremely concerned about ransomware, right? But not just from a data loss standpoint, but also from a responsibility standpoint, right? Because someone needs to be responsible for the ransomware attacks that can take place, right? And that was a big concern for them. So they found in VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery a solution that allowed them to not have to worry about ransomware recovery. They are able to replicate their snapshots with intervals as low as 30 minutes. They are meeting their SLAs, and at the same time, they are supporting their movement to cloud by leveraging DRAS as an on-ramp for cloud adoption. So
Nice.
it's been a really good experience.
And is that also because they don't have to worry about where the recovery sources are any longer? In that particular example, they essentially were able to shed, I'll call it, some technical debt, which was legacy hardware stuff, and then they were able to adopt a bit more flexible recovery pattern. And if necessary, that scales up should they need to have a disaster recovery target.
Absolutely.
Correct?
Yeah, so the backup snapshots, which are immutable, are stored in an offsite cloud-based location in our scale-out cloud file system, which is part of the VMware Cloud DR service that we offer, right?
Yes.
And then those snapshots are live mounted in the cloud in the event of a failover in an SDDC that can either be provisioned on demand or with a small footprint that then gets scaled on demand, and this is called pilot light mode.
Nice. Wow. All right. That's super cool. I could have used it about a decade ago when
Yeah.
Yeah. So, there were a couple other things that I know you've worked hard on, and I think I want to highlight. The first is I know that for a lot of organizations, the new offerings are complex. And I say they're complex because they're operating across multiple infrastructure solutions. That might be multiple clouds, multiple data centers, or multiple managed service providers, depending on your organization. They may be tied to existing vendors. You've got your Microsoft Azure commitment, you've got your IBM commitment, you've got your Alibaba commitment, all of these things. And as they're sorting through these different things, I think you've created somewhat of a guide to preparedness. And I have to say, my wife's favorite book is the Worst Case Scenario Guidebook. And so she keeps that by the bedside table. And every once in a while, I find her just kind of thumbing through it. And I'm like, well, you would have made a great disaster recovery director because you're just kind of prepared for anything. But what was the document you worked on that I feel will help customers who are sorting through these different complex areas?
So the ebook that we created is basically addressed at all the steps that actually need to happen for you to have a robust disaster recovery strategy, right? It's what happens before. It's the data management that needs to happen for you to have good visibility into the workloads that you're protecting, right? So it's comprised of 5 stages, which are plan, define, configure, test, and operate, right? And it guides customers through the experience of implementing VMware Cloud DR within their ecosystem and actually configuring the right steps to make sure that the product is actually protecting what they want it to protect, right? So it's basically a guide for folks looking to expand on their DR knowledge a little bit more, and to it includes some pro tips that are very useful related to the product. And yeah, it's basically an introductory guide for folks looking to better protect their data.
Nice, really good stuff, and super useful. I think the other thing that, and I hate to say that this is a necessity in our world, but it is that there's also a ransomware recovery guide, and that is, I would say, this is the flip side of the coin, right? So one is proactive, the other one is definitely, I would consider, reactive in terms of who needs to use it. And can you tell me a little bit about that one?
Yeah, I would call it more adaptive.
Okay.
In the sense that, you know, we wanna say that we are ready for ransomware, right? But yeah, so that ransomware recovery guide is a more technical document that covers the 5 stages for ransomware protection that I mentioned earlier, in conjunction with Carbon Black. And basically, it explains users how to properly leverage the product in the case of a ransomware attack, to be able to identify the recovery points that they want to fail over, as well as understand what the key things to do are to prevent reinfection. So it's all about reestablishing operations as usual after a ransomware attack.
Great. Well, you know, believe it or not, we've already spent 20 minutes on this subject. It's gone very quickly, and I always like to ask a couple of questions before we end the show. So the first one I have is, you know, when you're not thinking about how to protect customers against sort of all the disaster scenarios, what do you do for fun? How do you relax? You know, what are you involved in?
Well, you'll find me in the slopes this winter. I am a big skier, so, you know, if I see you there and you want to talk some SLAs, let me know.
Nice. Do you have a preferred like ski location, or are you discovering all these different places?
I like to discover at least one new place every year. So next year I'm looking forward to going to Whistler, but I usually go to Palisades, Tahoe. So
nice.
Nice.
That's super fun. And then I also always ask, what cloud service do you use personally? You know, this might be any sort of platform that you've paid the subscription fee for a while.
This comes with an embarrassing story because I did lose all my data for not having it backed up at one point. I must say I learned it the hard way, but today I use 3 cloud services. I use Google Cloud, I use Azure, and I use iCloud. So
wow, nice.
I've learned my lesson.
That's awesome. Well, Lou, we really appreciate having you on. I think when we think about having you back, we would love to talk a little bit about some more of those customer success stories, because I think other customers will learn a lot from them. And certainly, you know, I think I'm working on a blog post that will complement them, so I can stick some of those in there. Thanks again, and have a great day.